Hello, I'm Caitlin Carr, and welcome to Give and Take. This is a segment where we talk about new scientific discoveries that can help you further share your Christian faith. Today, we're going to continue on with 2819's birthday episode, and so we are turning the tables around, and we are joined by Jeff. So, welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Caitlin. It's good and strange to be here.
Yes, on the other side. So today, we're going to talk about some highlights for you, give you a chance to answer some questions. So you have a very unique way of how you structure each Give and Take episode. And we're going to talk about the first way of that, which is you are able to tackle challenges that may seem challenging in the Christian faith that I'm sure many of the audience members also have questions with. So take us through some of those that you were able to show actually aren't challenges for Christianity.
Yeah. Well, that's something I found having grown up as a Christian and being interested in science as I really started to think about how they work. There were just times where I'm like, okay, does this really work with Christianity or not? And one of those that I think is just kind of perennial in the Christian community is, what do we do if things are really old, if the earth and the universe really are millions or billions of years old? And so we had a segment on where we had Ken Samples, who's a philosopher theologian. We had Hugh Ross, who's an astronomer, just to kind of talk about what are the issues that are going on there? And so we talked about some of the evidence of why scientists think the earth and the universe is old, and how strong is that? And is that something that we could just, well, this is going to pass? And the evidence is really pretty strong for that. And then we spent quite a bit of time just tackling the theological issues surrounding that. So we talked about the meanings of the word day and what does that have to do in there. And we talked about just kind of some of the historical discussion of how Christians have thought about this. And often it can be presented as, oh, the age really is not an issue at all. Or it can be presented as though, unless you take this particular word, you're actually undermining the authority of Scripture. And that's what I loved about that discussion, is that we were able to show that, no, if you hold Scripture in high regard and really want to study God's creation, they do work together. And if the earth and the universe really are millions and billions of years old, that actually works well together, that you're not undermining the authority of Scripture. You're actually buttressing the authority of Scripture in that view. And I thought that was just a fascinating takeaway.
I love that Give and Take is being able to provide that platform to discuss that issue.
Well, and one of the things that drives me in having those particular discussions is just, it was a recognition I had that if God is who he says he is, that he's the author of creation and he's the inspiration for Scripture, that when we study both, they ought to agree. And that's where, when we look at this age of the earth thing, how old are the days and the authority of Scripture, that's where I think we really are buttressing the authority of Scripture, because we show that they really do agree well with one another. And that gives me great confidence that Christianity is true and equips me to go out and share my faith.
That's so awesome. I love another part of this show that you do is you are able to talk about new scientific discoveries that are really exciting. So what are some that you found interesting and that you were able to talk about on this segment?
I think one of the most groundbreaking ones we did, or just breakthrough discoveries that we talked about, was related to junk DNA. And I just kind of set the stage of that conversation as where I first began interacting with that. And as an astrophysicist, I don't do that a lot. But after I graduated from graduate school, I was in a colloquium, and the fellow was talking about how junk DNA provides just great evidence for evolution, and that we really are descended from all these other creatures, because that's exactly what you would expect in an evolutionary environment, because you would expect a little bit of stuff to work and then a whole bunch of just relics of what was left from past creatures. And as a Christians, we really didn't have a good response to that. But one discussion I had with Fuzz and Ken Samples was about a project where they were actually doing experiments to see how active is the genome. And so it's called the ENCODE project. Okay. And what they had done is designed some experiments that were meant to measure how much of the genome was active. And so we know there's certain parts that produce amino acids, make the genes, if you will, and then there's all this other stuff that was considered junk. Well, when they did the experiment in the ENCODE project, what they found was that not just this little segment was active, but more than 80% of the genome was active.
Wow.
That means that 80% of the genome is doing stuff inside the body, that it's not junk DNA, if you will. It's actually stuff that is equipping life to live, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's just one of those that kind of turned the tables. What was this strong evidence that seemed for the evolutionary mechanism now actually provides great evidence that it's all there with a purpose. There's all a design behind it. I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love the discoveries that come out that just help strengthen it further. But you've also had guests on Give and Take, and some of those guests are visiting scholars that have a variety of different degrees. So take us through some of those.
Well, and again, I think this is really important because while we've got some biochemistry and molecular biology and physics and astronomy and a little philosophy and theology thrown in, that's kind of the extent of what our expertise is. So having this visiting scholar program where there are just expertises from theologians and philosophers and biologists and chemists and geologists, it's just fascinating to be able to talk to them. And so three that I just found particularly fascinating in this discussion was as a medical doctor, Eddie Del Rio, who came on and talked about the crucifixion. And so from a medical perspective, as you're going through crucifixion, what's happening to the body, what's physically happening, and so when they poked the water and blood and water flowed, and just kind of giving some of the medical background for that. And what he was articulating is that the description given in Scripture of how all that played out and the signs that Jesus showed and what happened in there, that those actually match what we know, one, historically of how crucifixion happened, but two, the Bible gives us an accurate description of it. And where you affirm or buttress the authority of Scripture, that to me provides an equipping to go out and share the gospel. And one of in my class of favorites is a discussion I had with Ken Wolgamuth. He's a geologist, and as much as I like astronomy, I like knowing how the earth is formed because there's just a lot of power going on in the earth. And so we spent a long time just talking about what's going on in the Grand Canyon and really kind of looking at some of this old earth, young earth stuff. Is there evidence in the Grand Canyon for great antiquity? And how do we use that to show that God's at work and there's a purpose and all going on in there? That's just three of the things. So we got a doctor, a philosopher, theologian, a geologist, and there are others that we did. It's just kind of neat to see the community of scholars that are working to show that Christianity really is a rational and reasonable faith.
Jeff, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to turn the tables around on you today. And I just want to encourage everyone out there to come back each week for new scientific discoveries that can help you further share your faith with friends and family.